Welcome to Mastering Your World Through Frequencies. In this episode, there's an introduction, an interview, and most importantly, at the end, a group frequency calibration where the frequency work happens and change is catalyzed. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, this is Karen Cheong, and I'm here with my co-host Tia Sims. There's a commonly held belief that our thoughts create our reality. But is that really true? Today we're discussing the power of our thoughts and a critical distinction that you need to understand in order to have the best life experience. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. So let's get started.
Hey Karen, so cool topic. A lot of people hear the saying, your thoughts create your reality.
Yeah.
Right? It's a pretty common saying. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so from what I can remember, it seems like that idea of thoughts creating our reality really came in the 90s, like when The Secret came in, the law of attraction, all that sort of stuff, where there was this new idea, at least for many people, that we had influence over our reality. And so it became your thoughts create your reality. So from my perspective, that's not entirely accurate. Your thoughts can affect your reality, but they're not high enough in resonance to actually create your reality. So there's a really big difference there, and that distinction is really key. So, for example, your thoughts can affect your reality. So meaning, we've talked about before how we really are a bandwidth of frequency, right? We're not like a single point on a spectrum of frequencies that humans can be, right? We're just a bandwidth. So if you're having a lot of negative self-talk or a lot of negative thoughts, it will cause you to pull down in your frequency bandwidth, right? So you're not going to be your best self, for example. But they're not enough to actually create something different. That actually needs to come from a higher resonating order. That needs to come from a frequency perspective. So that's when your frequencies get high enough, that's when you can start to create your reality. What you and I have talked about in terms of co-creation, when your frequency resonance gets high enough that you don't have distortion patterns, which sort of muddy the water of creation. So, that's why in a large part, for example, positive affirmations don't really work.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, because you're thinking you desire a different outcome. You're saying things that indicate that desire, but internally you feel totally the opposite, right?
And because of that difference, nothing's going to be created.
Yeah, you have all this polarization within you. In fact, you create more polarization because you're trying to make something different than what you actually are feeling. And what you're feeling is actually a reflection of the distortion patterns. So you have to release the distortion patterns first to get up in terms of your frequency resonance to create something different. So, and the thing is, how you create your reality is really a reflection of your frequency resonance. So, for example, someone who's very highly resonant may have no thought at all, but yet their reality will be very spectacular, abundant, rich, and they're not thinking, right? Their resonance is high. So their experience in the physical is reflecting who they are in terms of their resonance on a spirit level, on frequency level.
Okay, so could you create with both thought and resonance?
Yeah.
Or would you say it's best to not use the mind so much?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. I really like that because there's this whole thing about desire being bad, right? There's this whole thing about like desire being negative.
Yeah.
Okay. So from my perspective, desire isn't negative. It's the attachment that's the problem, right? So the desire is the seed of creation, right? If you didn't desire anything, you would just like sit there. I mean, there would be no need to create anything, right? You need the desire to create something else. So that's really wonderful. And then you can use that desire to start the creation manifestation process. Okay. But by itself, just the desire to want to do something different or the thought that you want something different isn't enough to change your reality. There are a lot of people who want something different, but the realities don't change.
Right, because they are resonating differently.
Yeah, they're resonating in a low order.
The thought is putting out there.
Exactly. And they have the distortion patterns. The thought is a reflection of the distortion. Right? So the distortion pattern exists. And then your thoughts and your emotions are a reflection of the distortion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's the distortion first. Everything exists first on the frequency level. So to go back to episode 97, your very favorite.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so here you are, right? Just for people who don't know what that is, like how your reality is created.
Yeah.
Yeah? So you have your spirit body, which is a sphere at arm's length all around you, and it projects into the center of itself your physical body, and also your brain then is the projector, and your pineal gland is like the lens of the projector, and you create your physical reality, okay? Your body and everything else. Through that projection of that illusion, you have all of these distortion patterns, okay? Between like at the body level, between the body and the spirit body, all of these distortions, which are like different layers, okay, of like that look like filters, okay, like different thicknesses, different layers of like different levels of opacity, like how clear they are, how not clear they are, and some of us have a lot of them. Yeah. So you have a lot of these distortion patterns. So even if you have the thought, like I'd like to create something, that isn't enough to change it because you have all these distortion patterns. And the thoughts that you even have are, like I said, a result of the distortion patterns. That's why when a lot of people do frequency work and you start to release the distortion patterns, people will say, oh my God, I had all these different thoughts. Exactly. Because the distortion patterns are conditioning what you think. Your habituated thought, your habituated emotion is a result of the distortion.
Yes.
Clear the distortion.
I've noticed that personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially like, it seems to, as you're doing the frequency work, affect like your main thing in life. I'll just give an example. Like I'm mainly an acupuncturist. I'm also other things. Yeah. But that's my job, right? Yeah. So I notice the biggest shift in that first. So even the thoughts, you're right, the habitual thoughts I would have in the treatment room, maybe about myself or not being good enough or whatever the whole thing is, the foundational patterns. Yeah, that begins to change. Yeah. So it's like your main thing first. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because what happens when you start doing frequency work is your higher self is smart. You start to clear the stuff that's priority for you to clear. Priority. That is heavier, denser, that it weighs you down and creates those negative thoughts or the negative emotions, or at least habituated, yes? So when you start to release those distortion patterns, exactly what you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself, not just yourself, and then it starts to radiate outwards, your relationships, how you interact with people, the world, all that starts to shift because you're releasing those distortion patterns that created those things in the first place. So that's why you start to feel better also, because the reason you didn't feel so good or had those habituated negative emotions in terms of how you perceive the world was because of the distortions. Gotcha. It's really kind of cool.
Right, it is really cool. Because, you know, like, just like you said in the very beginning of this, the law of attraction, the secret, you know, like writing sticky notes on your mirror and saying it every day. And it's like, why isn't this working? You know? Yeah. I feel like teens especially could know this information. Yeah. You know, that age group is kind of where people start to, your hormones are shifting and you're very influenced by your peers and the media. Yeah. And it can be a challenging time.
Totally. So the thing about why affirmations don't work is because on the one hand, you really have this distortion, right? You don't like the way you're feeling. You don't like the way your world is. And then at the same time, you're saying these affirmations because you're wanting a change, right? You're yearning for something different. So you have this polarization happening where you're trying to get away from where you are and there's no acceptance of where you are and you're not dealing with the source of the problem, right? The thing which is causing you to want to get away from yourself and have something different, which is the distortion pattern. Make sense?
Yes.
You have to handle the source of the problem, which is the distortion. Then, just as you said before, all of that starts to shift, right? And you start to feel different. And it's not like you set out thinking, well, gee, in the treatment room, I'd prefer to feel X, Y, and Z. Yeah. You just started doing the work, and then all of a sudden you noticed.
It just shifted.
It just stopped.
Like permanently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty neat.
Yeah.
But that's a good point when you mentioned like the yearning, because we've talked about this, like creating and manifesting not from a place of yearning. Yeah. Because now you're just creating more yearning.
Yes.
But it's like a place of wholeness, right? You're already whole. Yeah. And this thing would be lovely.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, when we yearn, it emphasizes or exacerbates this tension that we have that we aren't complete. This is what we talked about in terms of absolute scarcity.
Yes.
That we need something outside of ourselves to fulfill ourselves because we're not complete. Yeah. So when we have this sense of completeness, which comes from when your frequency resonance gets stronger, right, and rises, what happens then is you realize at some point, it's all within. Like I have access to all of it. It's just that I want to amplify this particular frequency resonance that I'm experiencing right now. So you start to amplify that, surrender to it, and it starts to come in the most non-linear and magical ways, as you yourself are discovering in many different ways in your own life. So that's the thing. When you have the attachment, it's not the desire, it's the attachment which causes the yearning. Yeah.
Right. We can desire. There's nothing wrong with desiring things.
Exactly. Yeah.
But thinking you need that thing to complete you, that's the issue.
That's the issue. Yeah. Or trying to control things because you have so much fear.
Right.
Right? That you're trying to like make everything exactly the way you want it.
Oh, that's a big one.
That's a problem also.
So desire and surrender.
Yes.
And raise your frequency versus thinking your thoughts and affirmations.
Yes,
that's kind of summing up what we've talked about
so far. Yeah.
So I'm like really into the topic of addiction.
Yeah.
Just because of my past and people I know, and it's just interesting to me.
Yeah.
So this seems like huge for addiction. Like I really wish that like this could replace the 12-step model. No offense if you enjoy 12 steps. There's positive aspects to it, but I see that there's something missing, in my opinion. Yep. Like this distortion pattern aspect, because you can keep saying over and over for 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, and
right?
then
the same thing.
And you know, I do work with people who have done that and are looking for something else because they keep kind of getting a bit stuck.
Yep.
And so the reason they're getting stuck is because the distortion pattern is still there. And there's with addiction, there's often a whole bunch of lineage stuff you have to clear. So it's really difficult to just do that out of like will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the human will isn't remarkable, because it can be, and it's limited and distorted by the distortion patterns. You know, so you're always sort of like kept in a very confined sense of like what is possible for you, because right, those patterns are still running, defining your reality, defining what's possible, what you think, what you feel. That's why releasing them is so important, because it's funny, like people who I've worked with who have done the 12 steps, who have found it powerful and done it but wanted something more, come into some sort of like ease, is really it is. It's sort of like, oh, okay, I don't have to struggle quite so hard.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't have to like fight with myself and like, you know what I mean? Like internally, that's the best way that I can describe what they paraphrase what they've told me. So that's really helpful. And also what's helpful is that they start to release the identity of the addict. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a big one.
That's a huge thing. I am
an addict. I am.
Yeah.
Keep talking about
so it's a huge thing, and I think it's important at the beginning for the process of whatever it is.
Yeah.
But what happens for a lot of people that I work with is that identity falls away so that they can replace it with something of a higher order. I'm not saying don't be aware of your stuff. In fact, I think accountability is important. We've talked about this a lot, and I think that's in part why they say that, I think. But I don't really know that much about it. However, it's really wonderful when people have that identity drop away, because it's just not there for them anymore. It's just not who they are.
Right.
And it's a new kind of liberation for them, which is really neat.
That's true, and now I can see how that can go for anyone, whether it's addiction and that's your identity, or parent, like whatever your role is that you think you're only that.
Yes.
Dropping that away.
Yes.
Knowing your brilliance.
Exactly.
Come back to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's all about like, how do you externally create your identity? And we're going to talk a lot about identity in another upcoming episode. But it's like, at some point, you, in this journey, if you continue with it, you start to release the identity of who you think you are, defined by relationship or things external. Okay, so meaning, like I said, relationship, what your job is, what you do in terms of giving, like for contribution, for however it is, right? How much money you have, et cetera, all that starts to dissolve, because you realize that's just an ego mind parameter that is no longer needed when you start to anchor into your brilliance, which is a higher, more stable form of self, which we call the big S self.
It just feels better when you think about it like that. Like, oh yeah, I'm limitless.
Yeah.
I'm limitless.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
It's like pressure's off.
Yeah.
There's lighter. There's more expansiveness in the field of that.
Totally.
Let's make a quick distinction between creating, manifesting intentionally and then kind of like through your default distortion patterns.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because whether we're aware of it or not, we're all creating all the time, right? So we can do it unconsciously, right? That's what you're referring to. So let's just say that you haven't been exposed to frequency work and you're having kind of a crappy experience of your life and your life kind of isn't great. You are creating more of that life because you're you're imprisoned basically by your distortion patterns. And so what your thoughts and your emotions are and your circumstances are a reflection of those distortions and you can't really get out of it. So you're unconsciously creating. Only when you start to release more and more of your distortion patterns do you have more free will and also more momentum to create consciously and therefore have an effect in your reality and put yourself into the present moment of linear time and to the 0 point of space, which we've talked about before, which is really critical for creating manifesting. So when you do that, then you're claiming your sovereignty as co-creator. And that's when things can really start to accelerate. So thank you for the question.
I have an example, I think, of what you're talking about. So I have a friend who broke her arm, kind of in a tragic way, but she broke her arm, had to get surgery, broke it again. Broke it again, and then like injured it again. Like, would you consider that an example of like some distortion pattern she's running where that's creating her reality and it's not conscious?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And also I worked on a little girl who is about, I mean, she's 9, so obviously she's not like thinking about things necessarily, but she actually injured herself, her head, by running into a sliding glass door, and then she got into a bus, and a couple days later, and smashed, like they had a little fender bender, and she smashed her head exactly in the same place again. And then something else happened where she passed out actually and hit her head exactly in the same place. So constant head trauma. Yeah. And so exactly in the same place, just like your friend. Yeah. So when I worked on her, what happened is I had to release the distortion patterns that were causing that repetitive trauma. Yes. Has she had any kind of, like, and this happened like literally all of the sequence of these traumas to the same place happened within a span of 3 weeks. Oh, it's a very short period of time. Yeah. And so once we released it, she hasn't had anything since. Right? The distortion patterns will cause you to cycle and cycle and cycle in the same
And we're talking
pattern.
about physical, but this can even be emotional. You know, people who attract men who beat them or whatever the thing is.
Oh, totally. Yeah, your distortion patterns create your reality. So
whether you're conscious of it or not.
Not exactly. They will call to you that reality because you're like a beacon running. It's like the distortion patterns are like a radio signal, right? And you're like a package of that, all those signals that are being sent out. And if what you're running is control abuse patterns, guess who's going to show up? Somebody who's going to control and abuse you. Yeah. And it's weird, you know, Tia, like the guy can start off being non-abusive, non-controlling, and be in your field for enough. And I'm not saying this is like a woman's fault, okay? So please know this. And it's a very touchy thing. Yeah. But what can happen is he can start to conform to that and become more controlling, more abusive. Not because you're doing anything. So please know, I'm not trying to perpetrate
the
victim.
Thing.
It's just a frequency thing. Yeah. So it's like until you can release those distortion patterns, the people that you show up in your life will be similar because you keep attracting them. Once you release your distortion patterns, then who comes into your life shifts because you're not running that same signal anymore.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I've noticed that too.
Yeah, and also as your frequency resonance rises, you also start to attract different people of a higher resonating order. They reflect you. Yeah. So it's really cool, and it's not like again you necessarily go out thinking I'm gonna like get all these different things from frequency work, but it's this really beautiful natural consequence of releasing distortion patterns and your frequency resonance rising.
Very cool.
So. Some people, I just want to talk about something that people have some concern about, which is that a lot of people will think, if I have negative thoughts, I have to really watch my thoughts because if I'm too negative, then that's going to create my reality, and they get kind of paranoid around their thoughts. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm just going to address that. So what happens when you are fearful in some way, whether it's worried about what your thoughts will create, or if you're anxious, or if you're like I said, fear, worry, anxiety, really, those things will pull your frequency resonance down. So you're pulling yourself down on the frequency bandwidth that is you. So you're no longer up here anymore, you're dropping your state, okay, in terms of your emotional state, your resonance is low. As a result, really difficult to create from there and have any real positive impact. Also, people who are worrying like that, like, oh my God, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking something bad, et cetera, and they start to worry. When there's a lot of that worry, it'll time distort them into the future. So now they're not in the present moment and they can't affect their reality as much. Okay, it's really difficult too. So that's why like worry can be really, and that distortion around fear around what you're thinking can really pull your resonance down. Okay, so just be aware that that's what it is. So it's better, instead of just focusing on what you're worried on, which is hard to like shift your focus, right? Like if you're like concerned about something, it's to just, you can do something either to move. Okay, so to like take yourself on a walk, you know, to change like where you are a little bit, that will help you, especially if you're going out to nature. It gives you a different kind of perspective. If you journal, if you just let yourself like journal, like free journal for like 5-10 minutes and just sort of get it out onto the page, that also can help shift. And then you can read what you're saying, like, oh, wow. And if you think of it as a perspective of, if this weren't meeting me, like if the words that were written were not me and they were actually a friend reading this to me, what would I say? Like what would be my perspective on that?
Distance.
Gives distance as well. So those kinds of things help when you start to like spin in your mind a bit. Also, if you do frequency works, if you listen to the GFC, if you do the GFC at the end, that will start to help you so that you won't be so low in the frequency bandwidth that's you. And then in the inverse, a lot of people say, well, don't my thoughts create my reality if I combine emotion with it? There's a lot of this thing, because, you know, a lot of athletes will visualize, you know, a performance, for example, before they go out. It's a really big deal. Or like an artist will put, you know, like a performance artist might do that before they perform
or presentation
or whatever, right? To like visualize and to have feel the emotion of the success of it, right? And then your body will respond. So the reason that works is because you're actually raising your frequency resonance up. Because you're imagining yourself, right, as successful, as in the whatever it is that you're hoping for, right, in the achievement of it. What you're doing is you're pushing in this bandwidth your resonance up to the top part of your bandwidth. You're also now really, you know, like you're really in it. So it's a form of being, even though it doesn't, I know this is going to sound strange, but it's like you're really, because you're so in it, it's a different form of the present moment. I know this is going to sound strange to people because you're so present in the body, you're so aware of the emotion, you're so aware of the thought, you can kind of like get yourself into the present moment in kind of like a sideways kind of way to create.
That makes sense,
So that's what's really happening when you're doing that. So all of it comes down to how high are you in your frequency resonance? How high is in your frequency bandwidth, that is you. How high is your frequency resonance generally? How much distortion patterns have you got around you? That will really be the things that create your reality and influence your experience of it, right? So if you change all those things, everything starts to shift.
Perfect. Wow, that's a great sum up. I was going to do something similar, but I'll just say in my own words too. So it's not that your thoughts don't create your reality, it's really that your thoughts affect your frequency resonance, which then has a direct effect on your reality.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to be able to create your reality, release your distortion patterns, right? Which will then cause you to buoy up in terms of where you are in your frequency bandwidth. And then as that happens more and more, you'll be able to move up the spectrum of that frequencies that we've talked about before, which then shifts everything in terms of what you think, what you feel, how you perceive. All those things are a direct reflection of your frequency resonance.
Okay, great. Wow, that's kind of a lot to take in, but it was very clear. So let's say, remind everyone, listen to the GFC.
Yeah, listen to the GFC, people. Your takeaway, listen to the GFC. That's how you change things. Yeah, the frequency work is what shifts thought.
Yes. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're about to start the group frequency calibration, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. Because I'm working on frequency level, GFCs are not like regular meditations. Many people go into a somewhat altered state, so please don't drive while listening to this. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.